So
Has it been 4 years? Did I get that right? Yeah.
Yeah, a couple days shy.
Yeah. When did you start?
It was the day after Family Day, 2021.
Okay. Right in the midst of the plague.
The plague
All
was
things
on
in everyone's mind.
full force.
That must have been an interesting time to start a new job,
It was wild.
in the sense of just jumping into something totally new, totally different from what you were doing before in many ways. But then also
Completely
not really
handcuffed.
being able to
Yeah.
see anyone
Completely
or talk
handcuffed.
to anyone, or
Yeah.
you're not going out and meeting with people. It's like, yeah, no, that type of activity is not allowed. That type of activity can't be done. But still being, kind of expected to try and pull off some of that stuff.
Some of the things. Well, one of the things that
Interesting.
was handy was engaging with MPPs, for example, because one, they were more available, so there was more meetings to be had. There was more opportunity. So I had opportunities.
Versus what?
Well, then trying to get out to their places, and then they're out and about, and if they're out and about, then their travel time cuts into their meeting time,
Right.
and so there was more availability to a certain degree, and then also just if you're doing that for some of the first times, it's feels a little safer behind a computer screen than in person. So there was a couple little silver linings in the midst of it was pretty difficult to start doing. But it was a good way to kind of dip your toe into the advocacy side of things and engaging the MPPs on stuff as well. So
Would you rather accidentally call an MPP by the wrong name or hit reply all on an email with a snarky comment about a politician? And please tell me if you've done one or
so
other of those.
who's receiving the reply all?
Assuming, I don't know. Good question.
If the politician
Use
is
your
receiving,
imagination.
if the politician is
Assume it
receiving
being
the
the
snarky
politician would say
comment,
it, yes.
that would be terrible.
Yeah.
So I would far rather make a mistake on a name, although that's something that you take very seriously, is getting names right, getting titles right,
Oh, yeah.
making sure that, is this person a cabinet minister? If they're a cabinet minister, becomes the honorable. It's
You have a growing appreciation for the way that, at least in the federal government in Ottawa, the House staff have to know all the MPs, not only their names but also their titles, and even more than that, like the House of Commons clerk, when they're voting, like he calls out their name and their riding for all 338 people, plus the honorables and all of
Yeah.
that. Like, it's just unbelievable.
the things that they have to remember.
Yeah.
is wild. I mean, and it's and a lot changes. Like all of a sudden, there's a cabinet shuffle. Oh, who's where?
By-elections,
By-election
elections,
happens.
stuff, yeah.
Somebody leaves. But also like, oh, what ministry is that person cabinet minister for now? Like there's a lot of shifting going on. There's been actually quite a bit of shifting going on. Obviously, federally, that tends to get a lot of activity. Here, provincially in Ontario, there's been a lot of shifting as well. Even leading up to the fall, there was a couple cabinet shifts last year. A couple of people left, created openings, things had to change, and then staying on top of it all is huge. So like, yeah, your original conversation or comment or question around messing up somebody's name or a snarky comment, rule of thumb is don't send an email with a snarky comment.
Period.
That'll avoid any of those problems to begin with, and then just be on top of it and double check your names and make sure that your names are right. I think the worst thing I've done is use the same email for the same for multiple members of parliament, and copied and pasted the email into a new one, and then forgot to cut out the original name, so it says it's addressed to two people. That's pretty embarrassing, and I've definitely done that. It's probably the most embarrassing thing.
Okay, well, you got off pretty good there.
Which
so
is
far.
pretty decent, and they're pretty. They understand that you're being efficient with your time and doing stuff like that. You don't want to do it, but
No.
been
These
there.
things happen.
Yeah, I've been there.
So obviously we're talking Ontario election right now, snap election. This is something that just kind of came a bit out of the blue, at least it was for me. You have a different experience of that.
Yeah, I think this is, in some ways, the worst kept secret. Last fall already, we heard rumblings of even a possibility of going to the polls last fall.
Okay.
Then it shifted last fall to, that's probably too early. We'll probably get punished. Back in 1990, Liberal government. There's a Liberal Ontario government. They went early on a snap election. They got punished very badly. They had a huge majority going in, and they decided to call a snap election, and they lost, and that's when we had an NDP government. So I think that there was some trepidation around going too early. I think that there was a feeling that going a year early, or roughly a year early, would be okay. But there's some method to this as well. I think there's a distinct concern that if there's a Conservative government federally, that will look poorly upon a Conservative government here in Ontario.
Still trying to get out ahead of it.
And they're trying to get ahead of it because I believe they're anticipating some clawbacks on some social programs coming from federal government funding that will go to the province. And the province then has to deliver those programs. And I think that this government was concerned that there would be too much federal government money clawback, that they would have to start cutting programs, and they would be, considered the bad guys.
Scapegoat for
Yeah.
it,
And not to mention, like, if there's negativity around a bunch of cuts federally, it's a federal Conservative government, you get automatically tied to that, and that's basically, I think, the rationale for going early. All bets were off, though, just before Christmas when things happened federally. I think people were thinking, oh, maybe this isn't going to happen anymore just because of the unrest. But yeah, Premier Ford decided that he wanted to have a fresh mandate.
And by unrest, you're talking specifically about the Prime Minister situation and...
Prime Minister situation and the situation in the U.S. with President Trump talking about things like tariffs and stuff like that. And the rumblings are that if the provincial government has to provide handouts and provide a bunch of stimulus spending, the story is they don't have a mandate for stimulus spending. They've never asked the Ontario people, hey, put us back in power so we can do more stimulus spending. I think the opposition parties, fairly, are saying, hey, hang on a second, you have a mandate to govern the province, given the circumstances that you're in, you have a mandate to do this. And I think, from their perspective, they're right, but also from their perspective, they're looking at the polls and they're like, we need more time. Like this, they're all making these decisions based on polling.
It's the same problem, the same criticism being made around the prorogation of Parliament at the federal level too, right? It's like, Absolutely. Is this really in the best interests of Canada, or is it purely in the interests of that particular party? And I think that seems to be the criticism here as well. Obviously, from his perspective, and we talked about this in the last podcast, and ironically, we were finished recording the podcast, and the 30-day sort of extension on the tariffs was announced. So it was like the podcast was already dated within minutes of us finishing. So anyway, obviously that's new. So there's a bit of reprieve, but there's still the threat looms. It seems like Doug Ford is trying to make this the key issue of the election. The other parties are kind of focusing on. It seems like healthcare is one. What are the other kind of main key issues that are being batted around?
Yeah, affordability is the biggest one. That's what people want to talk about, and obviously, 25% tariffs going either way. Either our stuff going to the States or materials coming into Canada from the U.S. Either way, that's going to impact affordability in a large way. So affordability is is by and large the biggest conversation that's being had here in Ontario. It was the conversation that was being had before.
Is there no blowback from that in terms of the Conservative government or Progressive Conservatives here in Ontario? Because it seems to me that when people feel the pinch in the pockets, they go to sort of the nearest government at hand, right? And in this case, being in Ontario, the Ontario government. But that doesn't seem to have affected their polling to date.
Yeah, so what's really, I think, fascinating is that there's been a big backlash on incumbents in governments and in elections all over the place. There's big backlash on incumbents. And the reality is the Progressive Conservatives here in Ontario have never been polling higher. In fact, I was looking at 338.com, Canada.com, and it has them at 98, 99 potential seats out of 124, and I've never seen it that high. So they're not being quote unquote punished for this affordability crisis, and I think a big part of that is the electorate in this country tends to struggle to see the difference between federal parties and provincial parties. So a lot of the negativity that people are experiencing, a lot of the negativity that's being talked about is in large part being put at the feet of the Liberal Party of Canada, the federal Liberal Party, the Prime Minister specifically, and the Progressive Conservatives here in Ontario are benefiting from that. I also think one of the elements that are quote unquote, benefiting them is, in many ways, the Progressive Conservative Party here in Ontario isn't really that conservative, and so their spending policies have found them in good steads with the electorate here as well.
They seem to have a little bit of an identity crisis, calling themselves the progressive conservatives. It's they want to be both, and maybe it's working for them.
They're leaning in one direction more than the other.
Right.
And I think the other reality that we need to contend with here in Ontario is that the Liberal Party and Bonnie Crombie specifically, and the NDP and Marit Stiles have not been able to get themselves out in front of the electorate in any way, shape, or form. People, maybe this is one of the first times people are hearing those two names. Whereas, last time the Liberals had the Liberal Party had the same problem with Stephen Del Duca. The NDP had a long-running leader in Andrea Horwath, and she was pretty well known. But right now, we're actually really, Daniel Zekfeld and I were having a conversation yesterday, and that the numbers where they're at right now, both the Liberals and the NDP, it's conceivable where the numbers are now polling that they could both not have official party status, which is, we were having a conversation, actually neither of us knew the answer to if there's no official party status for any party, is there an official opposition? Is there a leader of the opposition?
Yeah, what happens in that instance? Interesting.
Maybe it's the independent. Maybe the independent. Maybe the independent needs to be the one independent gets to be the official opposition leader.
Wow.
So it's an interesting spot we're in right now. Yeah. I do think if you really want to look at it strictly from a strategic perspective, I think it was smart. I think that, if you only want to look at it from, hey, I want to put my party in the best position to continue to lead, I think it was a smart move. Polling was high.
Well, we joked about this before. They didn't consult us, unfortunately, in terms of when the election was, because we've got a government youth conference coming up at the end of the month. It's not a good month for an election, but it is for them.
We'll have Ghana Government Youth, and the attendees will all still be there Thursday night. So maybe we can have a big Ontario watch party, Ontario election watch party. So that'd be fun.
Stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit then, in terms of your involvement in the Ontario legislature in the last number of years, last almost 4 years now, what's it been like behind the scenes trying to advocate for specific policies, being involved in lobbying, building some of those relationships? Has that been a positive thing? Has it been difficult to do? And maybe you don't have, I've got the Ottawa comparison, you've got the Ontario legislative comparison, but maybe speak to that for a minute.
Yeah, I think what's really important to recognize is with anything, relationships take time.
Yeah.
You can't start and expect to be best friends, and you need to build a certain amount of trust with people. You need to build in order to have real conversations as well. Politicians are people. That's the most important thing to realize is they are people with a task. They are people with a special task, but they remain people. And like any of us, we have varying degrees of how much we're willing to share and how far we're willing to go, and relationships take time, and they need time to grow. And so it's been 4 years, and what's been really great is to see how those relationships have grown, how we've been able to build on that, to build them out, and if every couple of months we'll head out to Toronto for a couple of lobby days. There's a bunch of different MPPs that every time we call, they have time, and we're there, and I think that's in large part based on investing time and energy in them, not only coming to them with our ideas and our thoughts and what we want them to bring forward as far as policies, but also hearing them and saying, okay, what matters to you? What's important to you? Can we find alignment? Can we find areas of agreement so that we can go back to our supporters and say, hey, supporters, this is a good piece of legislation. We should support something like this. We should continue to support this particular MPP's initiative over here, or this government initiative over here, because it's a good one. And so when you have that, when you build that relationship, and you're willing to both listen and speak to them, to listen to them and what's interesting to them, or what they're passionate about, they're more interested in hearing you and what you have to speak, what you have to say as well. And then also, like your friends, when you disagree, you can disagree, and it's not going to hurt the relationship per se.
Right.
You've built that relationship to be, hey, this is a reasonable person that's willing to have a reasonable conversation, and we can have really good conversations and in the end disagree, and that's okay. So after 4 years, you do build that. 4 years, that's something that does develop over time. And just also being heartened by the amount of people that we've been able to engage with that are excited about the thoughts that the policy initiatives that we've brought forward. I think it's important to recognize that politicians, they have to know a lot about a lot, and what actually ends up happening is on some of the issues that we are aware of, we know actually more than they do.
Right.
And that's because we spent more time with those issues, because they have to know a lot about a lot. We don't cover every issue. We can't cover every issue. And so we stick to some specific issues, and we get into them, and we understand them. We know them very intimately. And so, again, there's limits on what people can learn and what people can know about. And so our politicians are limited in how far and how deep that they can go. And we experience that they're very appreciative of the ability of us to kind of educate them on some of the issues. Sometimes they're unaware of some of the issues, and they're excited to hear what we have to say. And again, I can't say this enough. It comes over time, developing and building that relationship. Again, you've heard us say it before, over and over and over again. It's relationships first, policy second, because it's true. It works, and it's a good way to engage with politicians as well.
So speaking then to what you were talking about in terms of engaging with MPPs, obviously this is something that you as the grassroots team are engaging, encouraging our supporters to do. Obviously that's less likely during an election to have an actual MPP meeting talking about a specific issue, but there's still opportunities, I think, during an election. Maybe speak to that, and just the fact that you don't need to feel intimidated going into a meeting like this. They're people just like you.
So if after the election dust settles and you have an opportunity to go and speak with MPPs, or in other provinces, I think in British Columbia many of you will have a new MLA. Just do take the time to set a meeting. And the biggest takeaway that I can encourage, or the biggest tip that I can give, is keep it simple. There's a lot of things that you can talk about. Pick one and just be super clear on even one element of a topic. So for example, we have the Let Kids Be campaign. You could talk about a lot of different things with the Let Kids Be campaign, but just stick specifically to stopping the medical transition of minors. Lay out the information. Our website, letkidsbe.ca, is full of information on that. Lay out why it's a concern, why you have this concern, why that MPP or MLA should have that concern, should share that concern, and then make a simple ask and a simple request. And again, that can still sound, I don't want to downplay it. It could still sound intimidating to do that, but I'd encourage you to do it. Now, we're in an election campaign right now here in Ontario, and you will actually have more opportunities to ask questions or to engage on these topics, because you're bound to have somebody knock on your door coming up pretty soon. Candidates are out and about. Yep, you're going to get phone calls. There's all candidates events. There's open houses for candidates. There's lots of opportunities to talk to potential candidates and maybe help you inform how you're going to vote. Inform yourself on how you're going to vote. As mentioned on the last conversation, I'll stress it again today. Go to our website, and we have information on the Ontario election. There's a sheet you can print out with 2 questions about our Let Kids Be campaign. A sheet that sheet also has 2 different questions about how the provincial government can restrict medical assistance in dying, euthanasia, and assisted suicide. So there's 2 questions for each. So we've kept it super simple. You don't have to we wouldn't even say to you, ask all 4 questions. Just pick one of those 4 questions. If a candidate knocks on your door, ask them their opinion on one of those questions. Pick up the phone, call their offices, their campaign offices. Ask somebody there what the candidate feels about that certain issue. All candidate meetings, so on and so forth. Just keep it simple, though. I can't stress that one enough. Keep it simple, and then don't don't let that one interaction, that one meeting be the only time you ever connect with them. Find other areas and other ways to do that.
Yeah, and I think during an election, that's an opportunity to do that. I mean, you've obviously spoken to our 12-step action plan before, in terms of it's a monthly plan whereby you can build a relationship with your MP or MLA or MVP or whatever. And the key thing there is actually that some of the first interactions you have aren't issue focused, right?
Yep.
It's just getting your face in front of the other person's face, sort of, and having that name recognition a little bit. And the issue can come after that. Now, during an election, I think there's more appetite from them and to hear from voters and to hear, okay, what's the issue that matters to you? So I think that's where there's a bit of an in this context, especially in such a short campaign time, to get those questions in.
Yeah, right now, it's totally logical to engage and have a conversation on the issues and what's at stake during the election. I think have at it. They want to hear from you on that. But yeah, the 12-step action plan that we've talked about before, that is an opportunity to kind of continue the conversation, continue the relationship. A candidate comes to your door, ask them one of these questions. But hey, let's say that candidate is elected, in the next few weeks. February 27th is election day, and say that candidate gets elected. Take a minute, send them a card, congratulate them on their election, and wish them well, and tell them you're praying for them. Continue that conversation past the election date as well. And I would say that no matter who ends up winning, no matter if it's the person that you voted for or not, use that as an opportunity to continue that relationship and to continue that conversation. And if you've had a chance to meet them, you had a chance to shake their hand, you had a chance to ask them a question, then the next time when you send them a card, well, then you have another question that you want to follow up that conversation, the question that you asked. Let's say you asked one of the questions that we had, and they would support. They said in that conversation that you had at your front door that they would support stopping the medical transitioning of minors. Okay, well, let's say they win. Perfect opportunity to follow up that conversation with a phone call or a meeting to say, hey, I'd love to talk with you more, and I'd love to see what your intentions are in bringing this forward. Because when you were at my door and we were talking about it, you had indicated that you're interested in moving this forward.
Yeah, you have a bit of an in then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, baby steps. When you take someone on a date the first time, you're not getting married the next day.
You don't necessarily want to marry your MVP either.
Well, you also don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But the analogy works.
A couple quick fire questions for you. Secret weapon in a meeting or meeting your MPP: data, charm, or just listening to them?
So the secret weapon that I've had is almost all of my lobby meetings have been done with Daniel Zechfeld. And so we come double-barreled. One has data, one has charm. I'll let you guys decide which one brings what.
Very good. Would you rather walk in a room full of hostile politicians or answer rapid-fire questions from the media?
Oh, that's fun. Room full of hostile politicians. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It would be
Fair. I mean, cameras are intimidating.
Cameras are intimidating, and I feel like a politician, you could shift them back towards
It's interesting, actually, you say that. Carl Truman was speaking at a conference in Ottawa last week, and one of the things he said that he's recognized is that conversations where people are in person, the temperature of the conversation always goes down, where conversations that happen in a digital realm always go up. So,
and even in the example of, say, the media, it is in person, but it's with the digital realm in mind. Right? The whole point is to get that soundbite and to trip you up into a soundbite. So I think that's more intimidating and quite more likely to end up with a terrible comment or two.
Would you rather read every piece of proposed legislation for a year or manage every single email in a campaign inbox for a month?
Would I rather...
Let me say that again. Would you rather read every piece of proposed legislation for a year or manage every single email in a campaign inbox for a month?
Oh.
Assuming Ontario.
Campaign inbox for a month, for sure.
Interesting. If you had a magic wand and could change one thing about Ontario politics, what would it be?
That there would be less concentrated power within the leader's office. And particularly when you get close to an election. I think one of the big disappointments is governments take about 6 months to get going after an election. They do a lot for a year and a half, and then they're in election mode 2 years before an election again. and everything has to go and get run by pollsters before anything can be done, rather than whether it be right or wrong. It's based on what does the polling tell us? What does the polling tell us? What does the polling tell us? And I think that's the biggest disappointment. And this isn't limited to Ontario politics. This is an issue countrywide, and it has been very much underlined, whether it's the Leader of Opposition's office federally, whether it's the Prime Minister's office federally, whether it's the Premier's office here in Ontario and other provinces. It's the concentrated power within that office that limits MPPs, MLAs, MPs' ability to engage on the issues on their own. If that is the one thing that I would love to see changed.
Controversial opinion.
Not really.
Final question. One sentence to sum up Ontario politics of 2025.
Predictable. I have one word.
You got one word.
Predictable.
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 I guess we'll see what happens in the rest of this race.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious what will happen at this point. I could be wrong. Like I said, David Peterson came in. He had a 95-seat legislature. He had a majority government. I think it was 95 seats in 1990, of I think 130, and he walked away losing because he went early. So time may still tell that.
Do you remember that election?
I do not remember.
No, I was going to say.
I do not. Well, sorry, I do remember it. I do remember the election, but I don't remember say, David Peterson was the premier. But I do remember the election because it was a shocking thing that the NDP became government here in Ontario. I distinctly remember Bob Rae becoming premier and people being somewhat shocked that was the case. It's the only time that the NDP has been in power here in Ontario. They had a 4 years, and then it switched over to Conservatives. But so I do remember it. But yeah, I think it's pretty predictable what's going to happen.
All right. Thanks for the conversation.
It was good.